I'd like to welcome into the studio Thembisa Fakude, a former researcher at the Al Jazeera Center for Studies and senior research fellow and director at Africa-Asia Dialogues. Thembisa informs me he's also currently the CEO of the Mail and Guardian. So assalamu alaikum to you, Thembisa, and welcome to Salam Media. Thank you for being with us.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
Thembisa, what do you make of this new law passed by the Knesset on media information and media organizations? This new Israeli law could potentially shut down the operations of organizations such as Al Jazeera in Israel and the occupied territories. And as you probably heard me say earlier, Al Jazeera has actively denounced this. They have been painted, of course, as being having been actively participating in Hamas's October 7th attack, a charge that Al Jazeera media has denounced, saying it is nothing but dangerous and ludicrous lies. So, what effect would this have on both Al Jazeera's work in the occupied territories and that of other independent foreign news organizations?
Well, this is not the first time Israel has tried to shut down Al Jazeera, including the Americans, by the way. The Americans have attempted over the past to come up with similar laws that will see Al Jazeera regarded as a state agent. And that's what they are trying to do. And the whole point is to try and suppress freedom of expression, is to try and suppress the voices of the Palestinians from being heard throughout the world. So in Palestine proper, I mean in Israel 48, which is other people call it Palestine 48, you have Al Jazeera telling stories that very few media organizations are telling. For example, many media organizations have been muted when it comes to the ongoing protests inside Israel. And I think the last straw was on Saturday when Al Jazeera had back-to-back coverage of the thousands of protesters in Tel Aviv who were calling for the resignation of Benjamin Netanyahu. So this is an attempt to suppress those voices, is an attempt to stop pictures from reaching the world in terms of what's going on inside Israel and all the atrocities that are taking place. By the way, you have a huge population of the Palestinians who live inside Israel, who are also oppressed and facing daily abuse by the Israeli government. So this is mainly to suppress and again intimidate journalists, even those that are inside Israel. But I think the other point which I think is very important, when RT was shut down by a number of organizations because of whatever reasons that Russia is currently, that's currently happening in Ukraine.
Yes.
Very few people were vocal. We're all kind of quiet in terms of condemning that. Well, chicken have come home to roost now. And this, to me, at least drives the point home that the media, who, irrespective of where it's located, is under pressure and under siege from all of these dictators and brutes around the world to try and suppress freedom of expression.
Indeed. And, whatever one thinks about RT, the very fact that it was an alternative news source and an alternative voice in amongst the mainstream media operating globally made it an important contributor to the freedom of the press and the diversity of viewpoints that is so essential to the so-called third estate. So this law in Israel, as you said, it will suppress news of things such as the very increasingly growing concern against Netanyahu and protests against Netanyahu, but also it will prevent news about anything the Israeli state doesn't want to have aired outside its borders from reaching outside its borders. So it could have a chilling effect even on so-called Israeli media, would you say?
Yes, of course. But, although the spotlight is on Al Jazeera at the moment, you might just see other news organizations, BBC included, also impacted by this law. So it calls for a solidarity amongst journalists, and unfortunately, we haven't seen much coverage on other international media organizations because the spotlight is on Al Jazeera. But this could just impact and affect other organizations. So the solidarity within the journalism fraternity is key here. I think we should put pressure as journalists, not only in Israel, but around the world, because what Israel does today could just be a precedent for other countries to implement the same.
Absolutely. We've seen attempts, for example, by the far right in Belgium to stifle freedom of the press. And even in some of the Scandinavian countries, which would have been unthinkable perhaps a decade ago, we've seen similar attempts in Germany to stifle any commentary on the Palestine issue, certainly, or any criticism of Israel, probably because of the Germans' ingrained guilt complex about the Shoah, the Holocaust. But whatever the reasons for trying to stifle the media, the very fact that it is happening in one country is, as you say, possibly a precursor and a very very dangerous warning sign for free press everywhere. So all freedom of expression institutions and organizations, including those at academic institutions and within state organizations, should be concerned about this. The one organization that has actually come out and spoken against this law is the Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPJ, and Jody Ginsburg, the chief executive officer of the CPJ, said the passing of this law is an incredibly worrying move. She went on to say it's another example of the tightening of the free press and the stranglehold that the Israeli government would like to exercise. She said also that we've seen this kind of language before from Netanyahu and Israeli officials, in which they try to paint journalists as terrorists and criminals. It's nothing new. We've also seen specifically the targeting of journalists in Gaza, but also the targeting of Al Jazeera journalists over the last several years, including, of course, the tragic killing of Shireen Abu Akleh in the West Bank not so long ago in 2022, and more recently the killing of Al Jazeera journalists Samir Abudaki and Hamza Dahdu during this genocide in Gaza, and also the attempts to intimidate journalists by targeting their family members and friends, etc. So the situation is really, really quite worrying. What do you think the response from Al Jazeera specifically will be, Thembisa?
Well, Al Jazeera's hands are tied. They can't do much. We know how many journalists from Al Jazeera have been killed. We just mentioned Shireen Abu Akleh. That case is still on, and Israelis have made it very clear that they're not going to be part and parcel in terms of them either responding to the courts, whether it's in inside Israel, Palestine, or anywhere in the world. So that's basically out the window. So Al Jazeera's hands are tied in this regard. The best they can do, of course, is to continue reminding the world of the importance of the work that they do. We have Al Jazeera journalists that are currently in jails in Egypt. Al Jazeera's bureaus have been bombarded, and Al Jazeera journalists in other parts of the world arrested. So there's nothing much really they can do because they don't have the muscle nor power to impose themselves and their rights to all of these countries. Countries are governed by their own domestic laws, and they can do as they wish. So it's not only Israel, by the way. If you look at the treatment of other journalists in other various parts of so-called Muslim and Arab countries are worse than what's going on in Israel. In Syria, for example, thousands of journalists were injured and hundreds killed. Iraq, Egypt is one of the biggest jailers of journalists, suppression of rights of journalists. So, whilst today the story is about Israel, but in these other countries, particularly the so-called Muslim Arab countries, the treatment of journalists is worse. Journalists are still treated as the enemies of the state, and the public is mobilized to work against journalists and to be hostile towards journalism. So Al Jazeera can't do much, but I think they've tried to form a platform that seeks to promote the rights of journalists, etc. And that is the work continues, but I don't think they've made enough inroads to convince at least the world that it's important of the importance of journalism.
What about organizations such as the International Press Freedom Network, and freedom of expression networks globally? Would pressure from them make any difference to the implementation of this law?
I don't think so. I mean, even themselves, they are very picky in terms of what cases they take. Al Jazeera has got dozens of cases that require an intervention of organizations such as the ICJ and others, but they haven't. We know, for example, at the moment, over 200, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 133 journalists have been killed since this war started in Gaza. And, of course, we hear of them now and then. But again, we also understand that they are a non-profit organization, not backed by state. They are a voluntary organization, so they can't really impose themselves much, nor take these cases to places where they are supposed to be debated. So until the journalism are given power these institutions, that is, power to take countries such as Israel and others that continue violating the rights of journalists, there is really nothing much that this institution can do to ensure that.
Yeah, that's a sad state of affairs, isn't it? You've mentioned the collusion of other Arab states and the active suppression of journalism in those states as well. You've mentioned Syria, Iraq, Egypt particularly, but also countries such as the UAE and Bahrain, because they are currently either one form of theocracy or autocracy or the other. They are also, and Saudi Arabia are also complicit in the killing of journalists. I mean, we've seen Saudi Arabia's very open and overt killing in Turkey, in a foreign country not so long ago. So there is this complicity in the silencing of the media across the Arab world, or much of the Arab world. And it's part and parcel of their complicity with the Western powers such as the US and the UK in providing support to Israel of various kinds. For example, opening trade routes to Israel. And while they condemn, on the one hand, in their rhetoric, condemn the atrocities in Gaza, on the other hand, they appear to be actively supporting Israel. What's your comment on that, Thembisa?
Oh, well, we've seen them now. What's happened in Palestine. None of them, they were even hesitant in supporting the South African position at ICJ. That tells you what their position is in terms of supporting the Palestinian cause. Forget about journalism. But when it comes to journalists, of course, they don't even allow their own journalists to tell the truth about what's going on in Palestine. They are censored. Most of their journalists have to get approval, in inverted commas, from government before they could report. So these are not countries that can be taken serious when it comes to the promotion of freedom of expression and the promotion of the rights of journalists. They are complicit in the oppression of Palestinians, all of them, by the way, combined, including countries, particularly Egypt, which shares, the only country that shares the land border with Gaza. It has refused to open those borders. It has continued to suppress the Palestinians. And as I've said earlier on, there are currently at least 3 to 4 journalists from Al Jazeera who are currently incarcerated in Egypt. Before that, many others have been. Some of us who were part of the institutions were not allowed to travel to Egypt because of the threat of being arrested should you enter the country. So these are countries that are not really necessarily interested, nor concerned about the freedom of expression and rights of journalists. Whatever they say in the international media is lip service. They continue suppressing movements of journalists, and they also, complicit, as you correctly put it, in the oppression of Palestinians.
Thank you for that, Thembisa. Please stay with us while we go to an ad break, and then we'll come and wrap up.
Salam Media, your spiritual companion this Ramadan. This Ramadan, spread the love with Sunshine D margarine, the perfect addition to your seri table for spreading, baking, and cooking. Sunshine D is rich in essential vitamin A, E, and D, and is the tastiest way to get their day or night started. Sunshine D. Tastes nice, no lies.
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic Sharia and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
Southern Africa Dawah Network is a non-profit organization striving to uplift the disadvantaged and empowering through education and dawah. Donate to the SADN centers, the M.A. Motala Islamic Center, as well as our Islamic centers in Amoti, Imtalumi, Botshabelo, and Castile. Donate your zakat and lillah today. Contact Farooq Sheikh 076-321-0650, Yusuf Mohammadi 072-259-3457, or the SADN head office 031-304-8000. Our account, Standard Bank, account number 050-856-294 for your zakat, or 050-879-790 for your lillah. Dawah through education, education through dawah, the Southern Africa Dawah Network.
Are you looking for a cross-border road transport company that is committed in achieving high safety standards, who is fast and efficient, and also excel in customer service? Gardi Global specializes in cross-border transport from South Africa to Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. Gardi Global, situated at 10 Daniel Road, Benrose, Johannesburg. For inquiries, contact our trained staff on 011-614-3108 or email info@gardiglobal.co.za. Safe long haul into Africa is our business. Gardi Global Transport.
The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "The best of you are those who feed others." This Ramadan, join Penny Appeal South Africa in changing lives through Feed Our World. Provide food packs, hot meals, and sustainable food gardens. Make it count. Visit www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573.
Abu Hurairah narrated that he heard the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, say, "In black seed there is a healing for every disease except death." This Ramadan, experience the health benefits of this ancient blessed seed by using the Tib Black Seed range. Black seed assists the body to boost immunity, regulate blood sugar levels, reduce inflammation, and act as a potent antioxidant. Experience a holistic approach to health by introducing the Tib Black Seed range into your Ramadan routine. Available in capsules, pure cold-pressed oil, and a vapor rub. Trust Tib Health Sciences for quality black seed products. For more information, visit blackseed.co.za. Available at leading pharmacies.
Alhamdulillah. Muslims in South Africa finally have access to a fully Sharia-compliant emergency medical takaful and wellness product. As an industry first, Emergivac Sharia offers up to 575,000 Rand emergency medical cover at a private hospital for you and your family. Plus, you receive 24-hour access to private ambulance evacuation, 24-hour armed response services, roadside home, and even appliance assistance services. Emergivac Sharia offers you and your family priceless emergency medical cover at a fraction of the cost of traditional private healthcare. Simply download the Emergivac app and register online or SMS Sharia to 40777. Emergivac Sharia, for when serious emergencies require seriously fast response.
You are listening to Salam Media live from our headquarters in South Africa. This is Salam Media, keeping you company this.
Welcome back. You're with Aisha Kaji on News and Views at Salam Media this week. I'm your guest host, and we're talking to Thembisa Fakude, the director of Africa-Asia Dialogues, about this new law that's been passed in the Israeli Knesset, which would effectively end Al Jazeera's operations there. Thembisa, before the ad break, we were saying that, of course, many of the Arab states are complicit in this, but also, so are perhaps many of the Western countries, including, the US, which purports to have very wide freedom of expression. But we've also seen how the media has been manipulated in this aggression on the Palestinians, this genocide in Gaza. We've seen how the media has manipulated the public, particularly with that very egregious New York Times story, which spread this Hasbara propaganda that so many women had been raped and sexually violated during the October 7th attack. Yet we've seen nothing from outlets such as the New York Times on the violence against women perpetrated by the Israeli occupation forces, of which there is now overwhelming evidence both in video and in written testimony by many of the women who were held by the IOF or incarcerated in Al Shifa Hospital over the last 2 weeks, etc. So this muffling of Al Jazeera and possibly other foreign independent media will allow that kind of propaganda as spread by the New York Times, and only recently did they actually back down and say, yes, it was lies. That kind of propaganda will spread without any pushback of the truth, will it not? If Al Jazeera and other organizations such as Al Jazeera are forced out of operating in the occupied territories.
Well, Al Jazeera is certainly an alternative voice in Palestine, and without Al Jazeera, as you correctly put it, you're not going to see the other side of the story. And that's what I think this new law that Benjamin Netanyahu tried to pushed yesterday in the Knesset is trying to do, is trying to suppress precisely that and maintain the presence of a similar type of thinking, institutions that will continue telling the story as him and his government would like the current brutality that's taking place in Gaza and in the West Bank to be told. So it's important that Al Jazeera remains in Gaza and in Israel and in the West Bank, particularly in Israel, because what's happening in Israel is key in terms of putting pressure on the Israelis to change course in terms of how they deal with their politics towards the Palestinians. Now, without Al Jazeera, you're not going to see that. Other media organizations, of course, although they've tried to continue telling the story from their own lenses, but we know that there's been a lot of propaganda, and they are currently embedded with the Jewish army or the Israeli Defense Force as they continue going both in the West Bank and in Gaza, killing the Palestinians. So their perspective on what's going on is largely impacted by that bias. Whereas Al Jazeera has insisted on independence. It's got journalists not only in the West Bank and in Gaza, but inside Israel. And they try to tell the story that's supposed to be told. If you have been watching, these are journalists that, trial tested, very professional. But of course, because of the hostility that the government has seeked to spread throughout the community, most of them are now facing threats within their communities, particularly those that come from Palestine 48. They're facing threats as they travel from story to their home, and that is creating a lot of problems for them. And I think with this new law, certainly they're going to be suppressed henceforth from telling the story freely.
Yes, indeed. So it's going to be, I think, a very chilling state of affairs, and perhaps even have a chilling effect on other media within Israel, those that have traditionally been called left wing, even though they haven't actively supported the Palestinian cause, outlets such as Haaretz, etc. So I see you have behind you, Thembisa, a poster of the Weekly Mail, which operated in South Africa under apartheid, which was subject to similar kinds of attempts to shut it down, to suppress it, etc. Can you perhaps, for our listeners, as a last roundup of this issue, draw the parallels between the effects of such legislation on Israeli media, particularly, or media operating within so-called Israel, and how this had a chilling effect to some extent on organizations such as the Weekly Mail and others in apartheid South Africa?
Well, I've tried to avoid the trapping to compare what happened in South Africa to what's happening in Israel. I think what's happening in Israel is horrible. It can never be compared. Yes, apartheid was bad. Apartheid was a crime against humanity, but we never had this wanton killing of journalists. 133 in a space of 6 months killed. Abu Akla shot on live television. Now, this is a regime that's not really, it doesn't care, and it will continue doing as it pleases, violating rights, even instructions coming from highest courts in the world and the United Nations Security Council. Yes, there are parallels in terms of how the apartheid government tried to suppress journalism, and it was indeed cruel towards journalists. But we don't recall a situation where there was mass killing, shooting, and injuring of journalists in South Africa as it's currently happening in Israel. I mean, the case of Shireen Abu Akleh and other journalists that have been killed so far, including the 8 workers that were shot, bombed yesterday, is beyond belief and beyond. We can't describe a country that goes on with such impunity, and they can do so because they know that no one is going to stop supporting them. The Americans continue doing so in the middle of this crime in Gaza. They've pledged to give billions of dollars to Israel for Israel to purchase arms and continue killing the Palestinians. So this is a group of individuals that are hell bent at creating havoc, not only in Israel, by the way, and also to export the same kind of evil that we see at the moment in Palestine to other countries. Because if they can do it, what will stop Vladimir Putin from doing whatever he plans to do in Ukraine and all other despots, particularly those in the Middle East, who are at the moment, by the way, we don't know what's happening in Syria. We know that Bashar al-Assad continues to suppress and kill his own people. In Egypt, there's continual suppression. So while this mess and this mass killing of human beings is going on in Gaza, you've got same despots in the Middle East who are continuing to kill their people. And as long as the world, at least the powers that be, does not come up with stringent positions and decisions in terms of stopping this, we're going to continue seeing these atrocities continuing for a very, very long time.
That's a really, really scary thought to end this interview on, Thembisa, that, what we're seeing in Gaza today might well be exported to other countries in the region and indeed across the globe. And we have seen that Israel is calling the armaments that it supplies and the surveillance equipment that it supplies battle tested in Palestine. So, we've seen some really horrific scenes come out of Gaza, helicopter type drones targeting people as though they were just targets in a video game. This is, as you've said correctly, it's a very evil regime. And if it is not stopped, and it seems that the will to stop it certainly does not exist amongst the major states, the major powers in the world, although thankfully their people are starting to take note. And partly their people are starting to take note because of reporting such as that of Al Jazeera, which didn't exist previously, which is precisely, of course, the reason, or at least part of the reason, that Netanyahu wants to shut it down. Thembisa Fakude, thank you very much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate your insights and commentary, not only due to your vast experience in South African media, but also as somebody who's worked directly with the Al Jazeera Center for Studies and knows many of the journalists that work with and for Al Jazeera. So thank you very much for your your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Shukran jazilan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And with that, dear listeners, we go to an ad break.